Okay, so this is where we're supposed to be. And to everybody watching the recording later, I am really sorry that I made this screw up. I was starting to talk about the Enlightenment and not Byzantine art. And Zach and Lindsay caught it. All right, I feel really dumb about this, but Zach caught it, so we're going to go on with Byzantine and Islamic art. Now, if you remember, the module right before this, if I can find that, classical India and Southeast Asia. And then before that is Mesoamerica. We are jumping around. Mesoamerica is about 1,000 to 1,300. Classical India, we're dealing with about 200 BC to about 1100 AD, right around that area. Byzantine and Islamic art, we are talking about right around the 7th century and forward a bit. So, and it goes back earlier than that too, honestly. But we're talking about a period of about 800 years. And so, honestly, it has its start in the 4th century, but most of the stuff we're going to be looking at is between the 4th and 11th century. So hopefully that helps a little bit. And this gives you an idea of the part of the world that we're working in. Okay, we have Turkey right here, and this is the Byzantine Empire. Now this time we have the Franks over here in Europe, and we have the Abbasid and Umayyad Emirates. We also have the Fatimids in northern Egypt. This is important because these guys this is all Muslim areas. That's the primary religion there. And notice that they're even into Spain. This is primarily Christian down into Italy, right through there. And by Christian, I mean particularly more driven by Catholic perspectives. The Byzantine Empire, this is what Constantine founded when he left the rest of Rome and started and put his seat of power right here, right by on the Bosporus River in a town that he called Constantinople. And the Byzantine Empire is, you can see it's in the middle of all these things. We have the Khazars, the Bulgars, we have India over here, and China. We have a lot of different things going on over here. Now, even though this country is Turkey, you do have the culture today. It's called Turkey because a lot of people here migrated all the way over here and settled in here. So, but what's incredible about what we're going to be talking about is all these different cultures lived side by side. The Vikings, the Europeans, the Byzantines, and the Muslims. And they really, where their cultures touch each other, you can really see in their art a lot of cross-pollination. And when one culture had good ideas, the ones that traded with them borrowed those good ideas too. They just infused it into their own work. Now, as we move forward, a big part of what we're going to be looking at is essentially the birth of Christian iconography. And it's not, iconography has always been something where a particular group of people will use a series of images and ideas to kind of cement their identity as a culture. And what I'm talking about specifically is the Christian iconography that we are very aware of today had its birth at this time. And this is where we start seeing things like halos right behind, I believe that this is Theodora. This is where we start seeing people holding items that are very specific to their station, their calling, or their title, as well as the roles that they play. And there's a couple things. When you look at something like this, what we see right at the bat is just 10 people. In iconography, what I want you to look at is this is a crown. These are pearls. She has a halo. She's under a dome. You see different colors. Here's red and green. Here's gold and white. There's little dots of blue. This is kind of reddish, a little bit dark purple, kind of brownish right around there. We see white, we see gold. Notice that all these Christian women are wearing hijabs. There's a cloth hanging over them that doesn't serve any function other than to just be above them. We see this open doorway. Now, from an iconographic point of view, the crown is going to mean emperor, empress, queen, king, something like that. Pearls are going to be a reference to water or the ocean. So there's various connections there. These colors that people are wearing may have something to do with their station. Like if we can identify this as purple, then it's because she's, it identifies her as an emperor or a queen, empress or queen. This circle behind her very quickly is identified as a halo. So even though she's an empress, she has a halo, which means most likely she is divinely ordained. And then what do you think the dome means? And if you just guess, that's fine. Or if you say you have no idea, that's fine too.
Could it be reference to the type of room that they're in, like a cathedral or church style?
Yes, excellent, excellent. So she is having a halo. She's doing something inside of something that is most likely a church, like you're saying. This right here, if it's inside of a church, this is probably going to be a baptismal font. And I'd be willing to bet that this is something that either holds the host, most likely holds the host, the sacramental host. That's what I'm thinking. So somehow this woman is holding an implement relegated or primarily the responsibility of the priesthood. I think that's really interesting. And our ladies in waiting here come from various stations. This fabric that exists for no other purpose than to just cover the ceiling is usually a sign of very high station. Because when you use things for something beyond their practical or used beyond their practical purpose, then that usually means you have extra, which is a signifier of a higher station. And then one thing, I'm really glad that you said that, Lindsay, that this is taking place, looks like it's taking place in a church, because I believe you're right. One of the reasons why domes are used in churches is that they represent the expanse of heaven. So not only is Theodora inside of a church, but also this dome emphasizes her connection to heaven. Her divine right to rule as empress. I think that's pretty amazing. So there's a lot of information there. And as we look at the different art from the Byzantine era, it becomes really important to recognize that there is a very strong connection to communication through iconography. They use iconography an awful lot. And I think, and this is just anecdotal, but I believe that one of the reasons why is that there was the Byzantine Empire was incredibly wealthy. We're talking about, this is primarily Byzantine Empire, but they're interacting with Europeans, they're interacting with Muslims. This is the primary crossroads between China and Europe. A lot of wealth is moving through here, and because of that, I think congregations had money to get things like icons, which is very important. If you're Eastern Orthodox, one of the differences between Eastern Orthodox and what we, historical Catholicism, is the necessity for icons in the church or worship setting. And because you have a huge demand, they didn't have an awful lot of extremely well-trained artists to meet that huge demand. So if you have a lot of artists that pretty much know what they're doing, but they don't know quite how to communicate everything they need to. So somebody knows that this icon is of St. Peter and this icon is of St. John. This is one of the reasons why people start using iconography. So that when you know a woman in a painting who's wearing blue and carrying a lily is going to be Mary, regardless of the level of facility that the artist has. Does that make sense? And then you get John the Beloved, you show him as a young man, everybody knows who it is. Or, you know, that's why I think a lot of the times, not because that doesn't explain why iconography started, but I think that helps us understand how iconography became so popular and so widely used. We go back here again. So I want you to read that article definitely. And I want to watch this video if we can. And we'll talk a little bit about Byzantine art. I know that we're on a time crunch because I was ridiculous for a bit, but I want you to definitely take a look at some of these links. So these are icons. They are plaques or paintings that celebrate people that have been so good in their lives that they form a special sacred connection with heaven. And for lack of a better phrase, they have the ear of God. And, you know, and so many people believe if God is infinite, there's no way he's going to have the time to listen to our prayers. But if I can connect with Saint Demetrius, and I know that he has been the patron saint of my family for the last 3 or 4 generations, if I ask him to intercede on my behalf and get the ear of God and tell God, I really need these blessings, that's who I'm going to connect with. And then we also have icons that remind us about what the sacrament or what the Eucharist really means. What are we going to church for? Who is the person responsible for helping us to forgive and get along better with the people around us? And who are the important people there? And you know, and so all these kinds of things help people relate better with these gospel and Christian type stories. Now, looking at this says Christ, and I was going to try to do this so that you didn't know who it was. But what are the elements of this that help us to understand that this is Christ?
The color blue.
I like that because blue is the color of heaven. It is generally associated with things like the Pancreator, God the Father, and it makes, you know, since God the Father is a big sponsor of Jesus, then that makes a lot of sense that this would be blue. I think in this halo also, do you see this little square here, this little square there, and this little square? What does that actually represent when it's behind his head?
Cross.
Yes, absolutely. And the only time you're going to see a halo with a cross in it is when it's a halo that's behind the head of Jesus. And it could be that Jesus is a baby, so he doesn't look like this. But if he has a halo with a cross in it, you know exactly who he is. And the hairstyle, the beard, those kinds of things will change. This blessing, the hand in the blessing with the 2 fingers raised, this is an icon hand gesture, and it always represents blessing. It was one that Jesus did, but you have a lot of other saints. If saints are known for healing people and taking an active role in making lives better, a lot of the times they will also be shown with that same hand thing. And then here we have, this is the book of the Lord. This is the gospel message, and lots and lots and lots of jewels. You know, and then these letters, they represent the sign that Jesus crucifiers nailed to the cross behind his head to remind everybody that the I stands for Iesu, the C stands for Christos, the X stands for I can't remember. It's like Soros, but it represents Savior. And this letter here, it says C here, but I can't remember what the word is, but it represents Jews. So it's supposed to be Jesus Christ, King of the Jews, is what this actually means. So I'm sorry, it's not Savior, but Krusos, which is King. I believe that's it. And then here, this is pretty faded. We can't see any type of facial features, But we know that it's Christ because here's a halo, and here again, like Zach said, there's the cross behind it. And then just looking at this, who do you think these two people are? We have a woman holding a baby. The woman has a halo. The baby has a halo. Pretty good chance this is going to be the Madonna and Child. And here, we see the cross behind his head. Even though this creature doesn't look, this person doesn't look anything like this person, still carrying the book. The two fingers are extended in the sign of blessing, cross and the halo. This fits all the models for identifying it as Jesus. And we have the same letters, I, C, X, C. I think very interesting. So definitely take a time to look through that. And then I'm going to click on this link. And as soon as the ad runs down, I will take you to it. Okay. I really want you to watch this video. It's only about 2.5 minutes. Actually, let's go ahead and watch it. Zach and Lindsay, would you tell me if you can actually hear this?
Yeah, no problem.
Art started after the fall of the Roman Empire around 500 AD and continued in some pockets all the way through the Renaissance time of the 1400s. Here we can see a mosaic work of art that contains a religious figure, and mosaics are images that are done on a wall with tiny little ceramic tiles that are colored to create this full image. So the Byzantine style of art was very formal. The figures are kind of unnatural. In this one with three saints, we can see that they're very tall and slender, so the human proportions are a bit off. We also start to see the use of gold, and gold was the most precious element of the time and still is, so they would only reserve that and use that on religious images because...
Okay, I would like you to watch the rest of this by yourself. I do want, these are all examples of Byzantine art. And some of the things I want to point out is, like right here, do you notice those eyes? Do you remember where else we saw eyes like that?
Egyptian?
Yeah, Egyptian, Mesopotamian, Etruscan. It's those big eyes thing coming along again. And the mosaics, a lot of the times, the mosaics that are, especially like in Ravenna and the other places we just looked at, are actually going to be made out of tessera or tesserae, which are little square cubes of glass. People would make sheets of glass and then chunk them up into cubes, which are called tesserae. And then they would use gold, after painting, they would use gold foil on the back. And the gold foil on the back, one of the interesting things is, if you go into some of these buildings, they don't have natural light after dark, of course. They only have candlelight and lamps. And the gold would actually reflect the light. And some of the churches that have this style of Byzantine mosaic, when you walk past holding a light source, or when the light flickers, you can imagine, hopefully, that the gold would reflect the light at different angles and would almost make these things flutter a bit. It would almost make them feel like they were moving just a bit. Can you imagine that? Walking through a church at like 10 o'clock at night, holding a light source, and it almost feels like these saints on the walls are still breathing a little bit. I think stuff like that is just amazing, that kind of technology. And then as we're looking at paintings, yeah, we're looking at elongated forms again. Now, people at this time, if we look at some of those plaques and carvings, we know that people understood the human body. And a lot of the times, there's distortions like this. Sometimes it's the skill level of the artist. Other times, it's to make you realize that these people are not fully mortal. And so bodies would be lengthened. Like of these three saints, these human figures are taller than they normally would be because they're a little bit closer to heaven. They're a little bit different than mortal people. And so and some of these distortions came not because they didn't understand human anatomy, but because you look at the neck. The necks are a little bit longer. the eyes are bigger than they normally would be. And part of that is because these folks are not quite mortal. These are saints. These are legends from history. And you also notice that the architecture within some of these structures, it doesn't look like real architecture. Again, not because these people were stupid. Doesn't have anything to do with that. It does have a lot to be with the fact that you're giving clues to the viewers that this is taking place in an architectural space. You're not necessarily defining where that architectural space is. This is one of my favorite depictions of the sacrament of the Last Supper. Everybody's wearing their halos. Notice that Jesus doesn't have a cross behind his yet. And what's interesting about this is the table is low to the floor, which is pretty consistent with the time period that Jesus lived within. But there's a lot of other things going on with, you have some symbols, some indications that the cloth is folding, but they're not really trying very hard to make it look realistic. Human beings, you can identify different people. Notice that each of the apostles have a different type hairstyle, different colors of hair. They're holding their hands in different ways. And a lot of the times you know who it is. Like, for example, this is John the Beloved. He's not wearing a beard. He's a younger man. And in the story, John the Beloved is a younger man who lays his head on the shoulder of Jesus as Jesus is talking to the rest of the disciples. Andrew is one of Jesus's brothers. He's also a young man, but he's off to the side here because he's not the one that got to put his shoulder on his brother's shoulder, I mean, his head on his brother's shoulder. So definitely watch that video. Now, I do have, for anybody who's interested in dealing with this in their project, this is a really good video about the history of iconography, and it discusses a lot of the things that we talk about. And I love this picture. This is from this time period. This is from the 10th century. And I hope you can kind of see, here's these cubes of glass that have gold foil on the back. Can you imagine how this would reflect? And what you would do is paint the back of the glass, put the gold foil behind it, and you can see that a little bit right through here, where there's just a little bit of a shimmer underneath that flesh tone. And then we also have the very obvious gold foil in these areas. Sometimes you'll see that instead of eye whites, they'll have gold around the eyes. They'll have gold in different areas just to make it shine and glimmer. And also to remind us that this person, he was a king, he was an emperor, but he was also divinely inspired and divinely guided. That's why he has a halo. That's why he has so much gold. Now, if we look at this, these images are incredibly pixelated because they're making these images with little cubes. But I want you to pay attention to this. It is obvious that these guys know what they're doing. They're not making these kinds of images because they're ignorant of human forms and how cloth really drapes. Part of it is they only have a limited number of colors. Part of it is they can't blend paint because these aren't paint. Each of these cubes have a very discrete color to them, but they are trying to communicate, okay, these people are a little bit more important than you because they're obviously taller. And sorry, I'm trying to adjust the size here. They're communicating that there is some volume behind the robes with these obvious shadow lines and things like this. And then when we zoom in, we can see that even with the limitations that they have with limited colors, and you can see the size of the cubes, look at the detail in these faces. And this awareness of detail comes with very close observation of the human form. These eyes, like Zach pointed out, are large like the Egyptian eyes. But do you think it's because they didn't know what they were doing? Or do you think they did this on purpose to emphasize the eyes?
On purpose.
Lindsay, another gold star stapled to your forehead. Yes, absolutely. And I'd be willing to bet that if you got a lineup of the people that were around at this time, you could identify who exactly each of these people were. because of how careful the artist was. So this is from the 6th century, and Justinian is one of the descendants of Constantine. I want to look at some of the architecture. Now, I'm sorry, we're going to have to go over this kind of fast, but I want to point out some big things that hopefully you will recognize very quickly. So this is the Hagia Sophia. It's spelled Hagia, but it's pronounced Hagia. And the Hagia Sophia was a church that was built by Constantine, and then it got burnt down and was rebuilt 200 years later. So this is actually the rebuild date. What is so impressive about this? This is built 1,500 years ago. And notice this building right here is 4 stories tall. This thing is gigantic. This thing is huge. And what's more impressive is that this dome, it's empty from right where that mouse is pointing all the way down to the ground, which is about right down here. I was told that it is tall enough you could most likely stand the Statue of Liberty inside, and she would not quite touch the ceiling. Can you imagine coming into town 500-600 years after this was built? You are a Christian warrior on your way to the Holy Lands. This is the first time you have gone more than 6 miles away from where you were born. You see this building, the largest building you've ever encountered was the town church, which had a ceiling that was maybe 12 or 15 feet off the floor. And you see this. I think it would be incredibly inspiring. And there are some things I want to point out, and we'll look at these kinds of buildings. This is another shot of the Hagia Sophia. One of the reasons why Constantine was able to get this huge volume of space, and at this time, as far as we know in the world, this was the largest contained open volume of space of any building on the planet at this time. So let that sink in for just a second. Some of the reasons he was able to do this is these structures here, they're called piers. They're basically solid stone, and they support the weight of this dome. So the weight comes out to the side. There's 4 corners. And then in addition to that, these are supported by these smaller structures that are built right up against it. And you'll see this large major dome, and you see this smaller dome here, and smaller domes around. And this curvature of the dome is based on a perfect circle. So it's heavily influenced by Roman architecture. Constantine moved here from Rome. So of course he's going to bring people with him who knew how to do that. Some of the other things we'll see is, we blow this up, we have more Roman arches. Very Roman arches. We have, in some places you'll see rooftops that are reminiscent of the Roman slope or the Etruscan slope, which is 22.5 degrees. So some of the really main points about Byzantine architecture is we have these domes that are based on a sphere. We have these arches that are based on the Roman arch, and we have these cascading structures pulling away from a central dome that helps support the weight of the dome. Now, this is another example of Byzantine architecture. We don't have all those same kinds of things that we saw within Hagia Sophia, but what we do see, and this is the Basilica of Saint Apollinaire. This is from the same time period. We have a central tower, which has kind of a rounded roof, and in this case, this replaces that central dome. But what we do see is in the middle, there is this major structure, and then we see a couple smaller structures supporting it. What do you notice about the roof line?
22.5 degrees.
Gold star for Zach. Yes, absolutely. And Lindsay, what do you know about these, recognize about these arches? What do they remind you of?
Oh man. I'm looking at them. Well, we kind of have that same brickwork that we saw with like the Greeks where it follows the shape of the window, the arch.
Yeah, it's that, exactly right. It's that Roman arch shape. Yeah, exactly. Same kind of thing. When we look at other buildings now, so even though this is not much like this, do you see the resemblances? Do you see the similarities? Some of them?
Yes.
Excellent. Now here, this is the Basilica of San Vitale in Ravenna. This is also Byzantine. This is in Eastern Italy. We don't have the central arch like we do in the Hagia Sophia. What we do have is on an octagonal room with an octagonal roof, and that is replacing the arch. We have the Roman arches, and then I hope you also notice right here, 22.5 degree roof, 22.5 degree roof. We have another round sloped roof. The angle of this slope again is 22.5 degrees, and we have these Roman arches, and then hopefully you'll notice that we have this taller central area and we have smaller buildings attached to it. They get smaller the further away that they get in this kind of cascade of smaller shapes, just like we saw here and just like we see here. And these smaller shapes nestled up against the taller central area support it and allow this architecture to stand because its weight is supported by these smaller structures as they move away. This is the Basilica Cistern in Istanbul. And this is an example of Byzantine architecture as well, but from underneath. And you can see again those Greek-inspired columns, like Lindsay's talking about, and the Roman-style arch, that Greek kind of brickwork that Lindsay was talking about as well. And this is a really good example of the underbelly of Byzantine architecture. This is another wonderful example of Byzantine architecture. We see these main structures here with the domes on top. The domes, again, are based on a sphere. We see the Roman-style arches in a lot of these structures, the facade windows as well as the actual windows. And we see that you have a taller thing towards the center and smaller structures moving away that help support it. So for this one, you have a structure right here, and then a structure right here, and a structure right here that helps support that weight. Here, you have structures right here and here that help support that weight. Same kind of thing here. Again, like the Hagia Sophia, we have a center structure. It's not a dome. It's that faceted tower, kind of, or the roundish kind of tower. And it's supported by steadily smaller buildings nestled up against it. And the roof line is 22.5 degrees slope, Roman arches, Roman arches. Are you guys getting a handle for this? Can you tell that this is Byzantine?
Yes.
What I would like, Zach, could you point out one feature that makes it Byzantine? And Lindsay, could you point out a second feature that makes it Byzantine?
I think the most obvious one to me is the dome.
Excellent. Right here, the dome in the middle. Excellent. Very good. Lindsay, what is another feature?
Like you were talking about the way they distributed the weight of the buildings.
Yes, excellent. Oh man, you guys are on fire tonight. Excellent. Very good.
Lindsay's crushing it tonight.
Yeah, she's got the most gold stars stapled to her forehead as anybody.
You might as well just give me your degree at this point, Andrew.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. Just go home. No point in doing anything else. This is called the Irene, or Irene. The Hagia Sophia is the Holy Wisdom. Irene, I can't remember what that word is. I'm sure it means something biblical or religious. Oh, it's the holy peace is what it means. Irene is peace. And the reason why I'm saying this a little weird, it's looks like Hagia Irene. And the pronunciation is actually going to be Greek because that is one of the main languages used in the Byzantine Empire. So use the Latin letters and Greek pronunciation a lot of the times. Interesting. There you go. Nerd fact nobody cares about. Now, I do want to spend, we have about a half an hour left. I want to take a moment and just pause for a second and let everybody know we have gotten some phenomenal projects from people. And there's been a couple of projects that are brilliant ideas, just aren't quite there because either they're in the wrong format or they just need another element. So double check if you didn't get the grade you wanted, look and see why. And then if you need more clarification, let me know. But there's been some amazing things. Now I have to turn in midterm grades on October 13th, which means if you have stuff to get done, like attendance things, weekly reflection, projects, do as much as you can, or resubmit with corrections the things that you need to before Sunday at midnight. Do as much as you can so that your grade can be as high as possible for the midterms. Well, what we've been looking at so far is the Byzantine architecture is very heavily influenced by Christian ideals. And you can see that in a lot of the iconography and a lot of things like that. Now we're going to be looking at parallel to them was another culture right next door to them, and they heavily influenced each other, were the Muslims. And Muslim architecture starts getting into its own. They have their own use of different ideas. They have their own principles that they use in imagery. And I have, this is one of my main fields of study. And I was also trained in Iran in art and Islamic art and philosophy. So if you guys come across stuff different from what I'm telling you, let me know, because a lot of the times the misinformation comes just because sources are repeated where the individual didn't really talk to an actual Muslim. But just like one common misconception is that Muslims are not allowed to show human beings in any artwork. And that is not true. The Quran does not say anything against that. The Quran does say you are not to have any imagery that you worship. So it is inappropriate for almost every event to have an image of a human being inside of the worship space on the wall that's facing Mecca, because that's where everybody points to pray. There are many examples in Islamic history where artwork of human beings was created. But for the most part, Islam tried to really work with every culture that the religion influenced. And even though there a lot of people, there isn't that strict prohibition in the Quran, a lot of people did try to avoid much or an awful lot of human portraiture. So this is the incredible mosque in Damascus, the great Umayyad mosque in Damascus. And I think we can see that this is about 200 years later than the stuff that we've just been looking at. Can you see influences from Byzantine architecture?
Yes.
They are powerful influences, aren't they? We have the central dome, and we see a lot of influence of circles. We see these Roman style arches like right here. One thing we don't see there, we don't see Greek columns. These are more of those piers that we saw in the Hagia Sophia, these square columnar structures. And we see beautiful mosaics like we did see in the Byzantine work as well. So I think it would be fair to say that whoever designed this, the Umayyad architect who designed this, was influenced by Byzantine architecture. And I would like you to look at these videos. I'm going to pop on this one really quick and see if it's something that we can look at really. Okay, this is going to be 8 minutes long, and I don't necessarily know if it's going to be, it's not going to be effective to watch it in our class, but I would definitely look at both of these for background information. One of the things that really is a big difference between Islam and Christianity, and I'm talking about the umbrella of Islam, the three main paths, and the countless different scholarly views of living Islam. The three main paths are Sunni and Shia, which you have most likely heard of, and then the third one is Ibadi, which is primarily in a very small kingdom in on the west coast of the Arabian Sea. So, but the biggest difference, I think, I point these out right here, is in Christianity, it's focused on the body of Christ. You have these icons that remind you of Christ dying on the cross, and it's everywhere. The human body, and I think it's interesting to me that in Christian societies, or even societies that don't identify with Christian, but are heavily influenced by Christian traditions, they still have a really powerful body sensitivity. And things like paintings and sculptures and bronzes of the human form are considered more important, almost are treated with a little bit more respect than images of other things. You know, that portraiture is really valuable. And a big part of that is because, as John said in his first letter, the word of God was made flesh and dwelt among us, and that is the body of Christ. Which, and I think that that's very interesting, consistent with Christian cultures. In Islamic cultures, however, the Quran was delivered to the Prophet Muhammad by the angel Gabriel. And this is, yes, it is the same angel Gabriel in Islamic theology. It is the same angel Gabriel that went to Mary and told her that she was pregnant with the Christ child. It is the same Gabriel that announced to Zechariah that his wife was going to be having John. You know, so it is that same Gabriel. And the Quran was recited by Gabriel to the Prophet Muhammad, and the angel stayed there until Muhammad memorized each thing. Muhammad never learned to read or write, and he immediately would go home to his wife Khadijah, and she, who was very well educated, she wrote down the first actual legible Quran. And I think that's the big difference. So for Christians, the body becomes a symbol on some level of Christ. And for Muslims, the written word becomes a symbol for that same kind of thing, where Christ is the bridge between humans and God. And in Islam, the word is the bridge, or the Quran is that bridge between humans and God. And so what's fascinating here, we have a lot of body imagery. We have a lot of imagery that focuses on the present world that we live in, these kinds of things. And in Muslim history, a lot of the art comes down to calligraphy and spaces to celebrate calligraphy, and then designs and patterns to remind you to get into that headspace, the same kind of immaterial headspace that you're in when you're reading and meditating. And I think that that's really a fascinating difference. I haven't written anything about that yet. This is still an anecdotal observation. In Islamic work, there's a lot of celebration of these ideas of that science is another aspect of living in the world with faith. It exists alongside faith. Where in the Christian world, you get a lot of history where Christian political leaders felt threatened by science, and insisted that people follow faith, because they're thinking about things in a slightly different way. In Islam, science supported faith. Right? And I just think that that's really fascinating. In Islam, you get a lot of patterning is used to help lift a person's concentration outside of their mundane worries, to lift you above the ordinary world that you live in. And in Islam as well, beauty itself, just the principle of beauty, is viewed as a valid function of art. So if you talk about what's the practical purpose of art, in Islam, it is completely appropriate that the practical purpose is served just by the function of being beautiful. And here in the West, we have this very strong idea that there is practical art for things that you use, and then there's fine art for things that you just look at. And in Islamic philosophy, there shouldn't be a distinction. You know, the art, the painting on the wall is serving just as practical a purpose as the beautiful silverware you use. Isn't that interesting? So I want you to look at this as well. This kind of relates as to why patterning is used in Islamic art. There's a heavy reliance or a heavy awareness of Plato and the Greek philosophers. Because even though the Prophet Muhammad hit the scene at 610, by 690, there were Muslim libraries that had more of these Christian books than Christian libraries did. You know, fundamentalist works like that are linked heavily to Christian traditions around the Bible, of Greek philosophers and Roman philosophers and things like that. They held that every written word was sacred, which I think is really fascinating. This end of the 7th century. This still feels like, to me, very heavily influenced by Byzantine architecture. But this is one of the first examples of what became truly Islamic architecture. So the Byzantine influence comes in. We have a central dome, smaller things around it to kind of hold its shape and weight. Where we start diverging is this dome starts becoming oval. It's not based entirely on a sphere anymore. We do have these Roman-style arches, and we do have this, which is a very Byzantine segmented dome. But I hope you can also see, well, you can't see it in this picture, but this is based on 8. It's an octagon, and this is based on an octagon as well. This is a common theme for both Byzantine, Christian, and Islamic architecture, and I'll explain that in just a little bit. But one thing that you see here that is different from the Byzantine is that the mosaics that you saw in the Byzantine stuff, look at that, this riotous patterning. If this was Byzantine, these would be depictions of plant life or the emperor's family or different stories from scripture. And then you can see part of it in the midst of all this patterning, we have verses from the Quran. So that is one of the major departure points. Do you guys see this shape right here? It looks like a cursive W, and then right next to it is this vertical line. Do you guys see that shape?
Yeah.
When you see these two images together, and sometimes just a cursive W, this is Arabic for Allah. And this represents one or singular, and this represents essentially divinity, for lack of infinity. And so together it represents the one God, or Allah. And you'll see that in a lot of calligraphy, in a lot of spiritual buildings, you'll see that cursive W and the vertical stroke, which represents Allah. And that is the name for God as pronounced in Arabic, but it is also the name for God that Jesus spoke in his last prayer on the earth. But at that time, Jesus spoke in Aramaic, and that same word was pronounced Eloi. So it's the same word. And you can tell that, I hope you can tell that in earlier, and this is all from the same linguistic tradition, that in Hebrew, that same word was Eloh. So it went from Eloh to Eloi to Allah, and it's that same word, because Arabic is a Semitic language based on the same roots as the Old Testament Hebrew. I hope that's interesting to you. So we're going to look at a little bit of art really quickly. This is an example of Islamic calligraphy. The Fatimids were, it was a dynasty, a Muslim dynasty founded by a woman that controlled a lot of North Africa. And this is incredible because this is indigo dye, which is the most expensive dye. The entire Quran, all the pages were dyed with indigo. And then what do you think the lettering is?
Gold.
Gold, exactly. This would have been $1 million book easily. It's just incredible. And so you can really see that a lot of care went into this. I would not want to work on a book like this because if you screwed up, that would be it. Your career is over, buddy. You might as well just move to Nebraska and not talk to anybody ever again. But there's a couple examples of Islamic calligraphy and the book arts. The book arts were incredibly important. We saw mosaics and we saw buildings with the Byzantines. We saw iconic paintings, different things like that. That energy given to those kinds of paintings, those kinds of mosaics was given to the book arts here. This is the Tabri. Now this is a little bit later. This is outside of the scope of our class. But if you want to do a reflection on this, just remind me in your introduction to the reflection, just say, hey, this was an image from the class. Now this is a later later image, but 600 years before this, that's when Muslims really started painting in their books, and you can find some really beautiful images. I hope this reminds you of things like comic book panel art, because that heavily influenced a lot of contemporary panel art. What's that?
Japanese woodblock print
art.
art.
Yeah, you have a lot of that same kind of sensibility. Now, one thing I want to point out is you look at this, there is stylization going on. But do you get the sense that people are stylizing because they want to stylize and that's important, or because they don't know any better? I would have to contend that it's because they want to. You have these plants are painted with such precision they could be used as botanical specimens. These people, they're a little bit stylized, but I'd be willing to bet if you walked around, you could recognize this guy in a crowd. And it is really amazing to me how careful these artists were. Now, of course, this is 500 years outside of the scope of the rest of the stuff we're looking at. I just thought that this was a beautiful example of this kind of art. And this right here, the Met Museum, this has a lot more in it that is closer to the time scope of our class. And I want you to look at some of the woodwork. This is North Africa, 9th century. Incredible detail work. And again, patterning is very important because patterning, when done correctly, celebrates the truth that lies within the purity of math and geometry. And this is a beautiful, this is how Ibn Arabi was a brilliant philosopher. And he wrote this, The Spiritual Structure of Human Being. I like this video because it talks about how Muslims viewed the nature of humans and their role in the universe. Very beautiful. And definitely look at this geometry tutorial. I do quite a bit with Islamic geometry. And if any of you want to do a project where you deal with this kind of geometry, let me know, and I'd be happy to help. So there are some beautiful images here. Then we get botanical design. Flowers are important, and we can talk about that. I see we are running out of time. I will say this: in Islamic art, you will see stylized plant forms in the back, and they're usually they look like pressed flowers. That's why I was saying they look like botanical specimens. Or you'll get stylized abstractive plant forms as well. And again, this is outside the scope of our class, but it represents some really good things that our class does talk about. And this is in the Renaissance, again, outside the scope of our class. But I wanted to show you these things because they are good examples of how Islamic arts have not changed much in the last 1,000 years, except getting progressively better. The reason why I include this is because in Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper, these on the wall are Arabic carpets, they're Persian carpets with these 1,000-year-old Muslim designs. And that's why I have it. 8th to 10th century architecture. You see the influence of the Roman arch right here, but this departs because you can see as these Islamic architects gain more confidence, they start doing things where the arches kind of curve in on themselves. Well, I was going to talk about the abstract of the floral design and the abstract of floral designs. Islamic philosophers really loved Plato, and he talks about the world of forms, where there is somewhere this imaginal realm that everything exists in a perfect form. And humans have connections to this. So when we decide that something is a chair, what we're actually doing is remembering a portion of that ideal realm. And we're remembering that there does exist somewhere in the universe a perfect chair. And so the stylized floral forms that exist in a plane that is not naturalistic is designed to remind you that there is somewhere this idealized realm, this realm of the perfect. And that is used as a metaphor for the space that is directly around God, or a metaphor for heaven, or a metaphor for an environment beyond the ravages of mortality and time. And so that's one of the reasons why you'll see these beautiful patterns and things like that, especially the floral patterns, are harken back to this realm of the unreal. So definitely explore the Mosque of Damascus. That video is a really good video. I want to get to it really quick. Okay. This is the Mosque of Damascus. In Islamic theology, this tower here is the tower that Jesus will descend down when he comes out of heaven in the last days, which a lot of people don't realize that Jesus is a very central figure in Islamic theology. But this is what another image of that mosque, Damascus Mosque. Person's talking about it. I'm hoping we can see some. Yes, here's some of the mosaics. And this is a Byzantine mosaic, Madonna and Baby. This is a mosaic at the mosque in Damascus. And you can see there are some similar elements. This uses the same kind of fictitious abstraction of architectural features. Well, they know they're not plausible, but they put them in there so you know it's architecture of some sort. The plants are stylized, reminding you that this takes place in that liminal realm that is the ideal realm, the space that represents the area of the universe near God. And you have river right here. So in the Great Mosque of Damascus, this imagery is to remind you to look forward to heaven. So this is not what heaven actually looks like, but this is to remind you that that heaven exists. And this is to remind you of that infinite realm of God's promise. We see some of this fantastic design work again. You see they're starting with this idea of the Roman arch from the Byzantine stuff, but then they're curving it in down here. These columns are very reminiscent of those Greek style columns, and they will use some stuff like that that is heavily inspired by Greek, but and Roman work, but it's not quite the same. This is one of the most beautiful structures, and this is where we start seeing a lot of that influence of the Byzantines, but also departure into Islamic work, where we do have the slopes, we do have the Roman arches, different things like that, but we don't have that great central tower or the great central dome. This is called the Alhambra, or the Fortress of Lights, but it's actually was built as a hospital, or heavily used as a hospital. And then we have some really beautiful stuff heavily inspired by both of those, the Byzantine work. And again, this is moving forward. It's outside of the scope of the class, but if you guys use it, since I talk about it, we'll talk about it anyway. But I hope that here you can see in this image, the Soleimani Mosque, the Byzantine, where we have the central dome, the cascading buildings. We have some of these Roman arches. And then we can start to see the heavy influence of Islamic work, where the minarets or the call to prayer towers. And then we start seeing an enclosed courtyard so that people could come in and feel sheltered from the elements when they pray. So this is heavy Byzantine influence with some of that Muslim influence as well. So that's all I wanted to cover today. And I know I went through that super fast, but what are some of the identifying features do you feel that you can get from the some identifying features you associate with Byzantine architecture and some of the changes that Islamic architecture laid on top of it?
Like we have the dome, like we talked about, and that kind of moved into more of the circular shape that we saw in the Islamic. Um, I really like the tile work and the color that's in the Islamic structures compared to like the Byzantine.
Yeah, that is an excellent observation, because here is the Byzantine architecture, Hagia Sophia, and here is the Muslim architecture, just a couple, 100 years later, a couple hundred years later. And just exactly what Lindsay said, there is this huge exterior mosaic right here, design right here. And a lot of the mosaics we see for the Byzantine stuff was on the inside. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And then we look at the Dome of the Rock. Let's see if I can find that again. Yeah, this is where you really see what Lindsay's talking about. A lot of decorative texture, a lot of visual excitement. Oh, I was going to mention why the octagon is important. And I will mention that it's important for both Christian and Islamic work, because a lot of the times right here, you see it very much as the principal structure resting against the ground starts curving towards the dome. Most of these structures will kind of spread the weight of the dome out with usually an octagonal squinch, it's called, so that the weight of the dome it will rest on like 8 pillars or 8 triangles that move that weight out into the rest of the structure of the building. And a lot of times the structure of the building is based on a cube. Here in the Dome of the Rock, it's not, but you can see here it's. I'm going to say it's based on a cube, because this is a big rectangle that this sits on. And in a lot of Christian and Muslim architecture, the rectangular building underneath the dome represents the cube of earth. And that symbolically meant to remind you that the earth has limits. You can walk around, you can keep walking to the horizon, but the earth is grounded. You can't get off the earth. And then the dome represents the limitless expanse of heaven. It's a circle. It's meant not to have any ending. And that octagon is designed to spread the weight of the dome to the earth and connect the two. It acts as a bridge. And so in a lot of Islamic architecture and a lot of Christian architecture too, you really see it emerge in the Renaissance. You'll have these octagon shapes because the octagon reminds you of the bridge between the limited earth and the arch of heaven, or the limitless heaven. And that octagon for Christians is a symbol of Christ, and the octagon in Islamic architecture, what do you think that represents?
Oh man, I'm sorry. What does what represent? Repeat that.
Okay, the octagon in Christian architecture will represent Christ. The octagon in Islamic architecture will represent the Quran. And it's one of these things, it's a very subtle symbol, and it's not necessarily a direct symbol. It's designed to help you remember those kinds of things. So I just think stuff like that is absolutely fascinating. And I'm not pulling that out of my ear entirely. I'm getting that from a friend of mine. His name is Dr. Ahmed Safi. He is the head of Islamic studies at Duke University. So I figure if he says it, there's probably a good chance there's a basis in reality. So here's the weekly reflection for this week. And like I said, I did pull in some things that are from beyond the scope of our class. But if you're going to use one of those images, just mention, hey, this was in the module. And I know it's after 1350, but it was in the module. And then do your thing with the weekly reflection. All right. Any questions or observations from the stuff that we looked at?
No, thank you for your time, though.
All right, sure thing. Oh, and Zach, I really liked your project. That was pretty cool.
Oh, thank you very much.
That
I
was
worked
really cool.
really hard on it, actually, and spent more time than I thought I was going to.
That's the way it always is. And Lindsay, what was your most recent project?
Yeah, I've yet to turn it in, but I went to Vegas and I went to the Caesars Hotel and did a
Oh,
comparison.
yeah, you were asking me about that.
Yes. I was actually
Yes.
kind of surprised because a lot of the artwork they have are genuine replicas of Greek Roman statues and artwork that they've paid people to do for their hotel. So I was kind of surprised that they actually drew connections from history.
Yeah, that is really cool because like their sculpture of David is actually one of the very few that is actually licensed by the Vatican.
Oh,
So,
I didn't even know that. See?
yeah, very, very cool stuff. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that. But do the best you can to try to get those projects and resubmissions in by Sunday at midnight so we can count them. All right, guys, I'm sorry for taking you over time because I was a ding dong at the beginning. But thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for being a part of this, and thank you for participating.
No
Thank
worries. Thank
you.
you.
All right, and we'll look forward to seeing you guys next Tuesday. Enjoy your fall break, and don't get into any trouble.
Have a
All right.